Hello, listeners. Welcome to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Ostler. Several weeks ago, I was on another platform. My friend Tate Arnold, who had me on his platform at Instagram called Over Soul. That's the word over, 3_soul. And I shared on that platform few things for an hour and a half. My call to be an ally, and sometimes the cost to that road. My advice to those that are suicidal. We talked about supporting LGBTQ people and God's love for all of his children. So this episode is just going to be that episode. I'm going to sign off in a minute or two. And if you want to, you can listen to me sharing some vulnerable thoughts at times on Tate Arnold's platform. Tate Arnold is doing great work. I encourage you to check out his really well done and thoughtful Over Soul podcast. Tate Arnold, I know him because he served a mission with our son, Matt, and they became great friends and still remain great friends. And everybody I talk to that have served with Tate loves Tate Arnold, Arnold in those days, and the big mind he has, the great heart he has, and the desire he has to help everybody feel God's love. So this is Richard Ostler signing off from my intro to my own podcast. And thank you, Tate Arnold, for having me on your platform.
This is Papa Ostler. And Papa Ostler, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about what your mission is with all you've been doing on your podcast and your calling?
Well, first, I'd like to give a shout out to you, Tate.
Thank you.
I became aware of you through our son, Matt, who served with you in Sydney, Australia. And his letters started to talk about you. You spent some time together, and just this bright, kind, thoughtful fellow missionary who's continued to be his friend. And ever since I started to read about you, I've been intrigued about you, and we've crossed paths a couple times, but it doesn't surprise me you've started a podcast and are doing all the work you're doing to help all of Heavenly Father's children feel loved and supported. So it's an honor to be on your platform and share some of my story. But thanks for what you've done for our son, Matt, and the friend you've been for him. And I'm sure there's, so many other people that feel the same way about you.
Thank you, sir.
Now, I think I remember your question.
Yeah, tell us about your work.
So my wife and I, just my station in life, I'm in my mid-60s, and I'm a Latter-day Saint. We have 6 children, and I was a singles ward bishop. For those of you that know that, it's a congregation made of just single people in our faith. And that was about 10 years ago that started. In the course of that experience, for the first time in my life, I listened to gay people tell me about being gay. And it was different that time because I had a pastoral responsibility to help these good men as they bravely and vulnerably and courageously opened up to me about their sexual orientation. And I didn't want to do the wrong thing. And I remember driving home, a 30-minute drive that night, and kind of a rebuke of the Spirit. God said, everything you've learned about gay people or queer people more generally is from straight people. And you don't really know how I feel about them. And you don't even have accurate information about what the church is teaching or society is teaching. So God invited me to kind of do a computer term, wipe my hard drive clean of everything I've learned about gay people and listen to them and be open to changes and be open to being wrong, all with the desire to do what I wanted to honor my discipleship to help them. So that's sort of my beginning of my journey to support LGBTQ Latter-day Saints that started in 2013, and these heroic men that shared with me about their sexual orientation.
Wonderful. I was really struck by that when I was reading your book, that term that you talked about, wiping the hard drive. So tell me more about what did that mean for you, and what does it mean for everybody?
Well, I believe that I grew up in a society where I learned things about other groups of people outside of my normal circle, and they may or may not be accurate. And it's so important to learn from people in different groups we're talking about, whether it be Black teenagers, immigrants, transgender people, people that have left my faith. And I call it the trap of unearned opinions. It's easy for me, Tate, to have opinions about Black teenagers. It's harder for me to not have any opinions about Black teenagers till I spend a lot of time listening to multiple Black teenagers. And then I see them better the way Christ sees them, where Heavenly Father sees them. I have less fear of other groups of people if I first listen to that group of people and understand them. And our theology, for those of you that are Latter-day Saints, is we're all spirit children, the same heavenly parents. So all these groups I've just talked about, at the end of the day, our theology says they're my spirit brothers and sisters, and we all chose the same plan in the pre-earth life. And so that's been sort of my journey. One story that comes to mind, I was doing a podcast, and part of my journey to support LGBTQ Latter-day Saints after that assignment ended was doing what they did for me, because I had to listen. And so I thought I'll start a podcast and let LGBTQ Latter-day Saints and other groups share their story, because that's how my heart changed. And so, but sometimes I'll do a podcast. I remember doing a podcast with a Black Latter-day Saint, and I became really uncomfortable during the podcast. And my younger self would have said, well, that's the spirit leaving the room. My older self sat with that and said, is that internalized racism that is causing me to feel uncomfortable? And are these changes, Tate, I need to make within myself to better support a Black Latter-day Saint? And it was the second. And it was just this uncomfortableness with my views about Black people that continue need to be refined and grow and stretched if I'm going to become the disciple God wants me to be.
Wow. Yeah, it's profound. So that idea of wiping the hard drive, it sounds like you recognize you come to life with some biases.
Yeah.
And the first thing you said, which really struck me, was that all these groups of people we're talking about, right, that you need to learn from, all are just the same children of God. So this division that we see is made up in the first place, right? But we take these biases on us, and for some reason it stops us from seeing people for who they really are. And what was your trick to be able to really see people and get past those biases?
Two things have helped me. The New Testament and Christ's mission to always be with those on the margins. And I reread the New Testament multiple times on this journey, and you read it through different lenses sometimes in your life. And I read it through the lens often of what's my responsibility to those on the margins, and what did Christ teach? And as you know, and a lot of your listeners will know, there's just multiple examples where Christ went to those that were furthest on the margins and declared them worthy by the way he treated them. And we could go through all those parables, but it just reminds me about the doctrine of Christ and everything he did. I call it table fellowship. Everybody was welcome at his table. And his loudest condemnation were for the people in charge, telling people how to feel about people on the margins. And so that's really profound. I mean, I think of, and I'm not a Bible historian, so my wife laughs at me because I get these backwards. I'm a little dyslexic for your listeners, but we were on the road to Jericho a few years ago, where the parable of the Good Samaritan was taught, and it's barren. And I thought of how that would be so shocking to the Jewish people for this fellow Jew, Christ, to talk about the Samaritans in the way he did, and the way he humanized them as multiple people walked by, but it was the Samaritan, the one that was the least worthy in society, that performed the highest moral action on that road. And I sat there looking over the road to Jericho, and I thought of my trans friends. And I think, what's my responsibility to this group that's been demonized by a lot of loud voices in society, that as I've got to know, my trans friends often exhibit the highest moral behavior and are the kindest and most gracious and compassionate people I know. So that's one thing that's really helped me. The Canaanite woman who was declared unworthy by Christ's disciples and shooed away, and Christ felt different. The woman with an issue of blood, which we understand is a normal thing now, and society declared her unworthy, and she touched Christ, and he declared her worthy. And I think so much of his ministry was about how to treat people. I think a declaration of faith today in our faith is more a statement of our doctrinal views. It might have been different in Christ's day. It might have been more just how we treat people. Christ role modeled that, so we could talk more about that. The second thing, to answer your question, is Brene Brown has really helped me. For your listeners, she's not a Latter-day Saint. She's a social scientist, but I think she takes, to me, the doctrine of Christ and puts it into terms that are really helpful for me. One of her phrases is, people are hard to hate close up, move in. And I love that idea, especially with people that are in different groups. And you're obviously doing that in your own life in this podcast. So those are a couple of things that's really helped me. And I've tried to not listen to loud. I've always felt Christ got a following, not with a fear-based narrative of other people. He got a following, and I don't think he was even trying to get a following, the way he loved people. And it became natural and organic. People were drawn to Christ and the miracles he performed and the things he was teaching. But in our society, on both sides of the political aisle, there are people that get a following with a fear-based narrative of fear. And sometimes it'll be abstract. They're coming after us. And I don't quite know who that is and what the threat is, but it can create community around fear. And throughout history, I've seen that so many times as I read history around Jewish people, Native Americans, Salem witch trials. And so it can, but I just think a higher, holier law is to not buy into that. You can still have political views and a political platform, but not based on fear-based narrative. And there's a lot of that. Brene Brown, if I can quote this correctly, she branded a term for me called common enemy intimacy. If the bond we share is simply we hate the same people, the bond or the intimacy we experience is intense and an easy way to discharge our outrage and pain. It's not, however, fuel for real connection, end quote.
Wow.
So that really resonates with me. And it breaks my heart to see, my trans friends and my immigrant friends and Black friends sort of, being the brunt of this politically. And I just don't think it's necessary. Christ never did that. It's so inconsistent with the gospel of Jesus Christ. We can still stand for our own morals and our own values. They can stand on their own terms. They don't need a bogeyman to sort of drive home the point.
Sure.
So those are just a couple thoughts for your listeners.
Wow. Yeah, amazing thoughts there. I loved reading what you said from Brene Brown in your book. Can you quote it one more time? You lean in. People are hard to hate.
Yeah,
close
people
up.
are hard to hate. Lean in. People are hard to hate. Close up. Move in.
I love
something
that.
like that.
Yeah, I love that. So we talked about Christ and how his doctrine, his example was always to reach out to people who are on the margins. And you tied that to kind of the bigger political stuff that's going on right now. And there's a lot of people being ostracized, put on the margins, and made to be boogeyman, so to speak, like you said. What advice do you have for someone who maybe feels like they need to wipe their own hard drive? How would you recommend going about that? Because that's a big change that you had in your own life. It's very hard to change your perspective and opinion.
I'd give yourself a lot of grace. You don't need to do this all at once. Maybe in a stage of life where you're so busy, you just have to take care of yourself, given the complexities in the road you're working. But I think the first thing I'd go back to the advice of, the trap of unlearned opinions. If you're in a group of people where they're starting to bag, maybe too hard of a word, where they're just talking negatively about people, you might just say, I don't know how I feel about this group of people, because I think one of the things I'm trying to do is learn about groups of people by talking to them or listening to podcasts from them or reading books from them, and just give grace to other groups of people and lead by grace, even if you don't know what you would say about that group of people because you haven't spent a lot of time yet. At least be on. I think it's great to just say, I don't know. about another group of people. I don't have any opinions yet. I haven't have enough proximity to people from a different country that we're talking about to really form a binary overview opinion about that group of people. And I think that would be the first thing I'd recommend. And then just if you feel called, I felt really called to learn about, gay people in particular at first, lesbian people, and then transgender people. And I had to then do a bunch of research to figure out what society taught, what the church taught. I didn't know the church was actually teaching this isn't a choice, sexual orientation, and you can't change it. I grew up in the 70s when that's kind of the first content I picked up is this is somehow a choice. And if you just put it all on the altar and pray and fast and you're going to be straight. And that's pretty harming for my gay and lesbian friends and cause them to feel pretty broken. And so I had to do a lot of due diligence in this space by listening to tons of queer people. And I use queer for your listeners as an umbrella term that more of my queer friends are taking just to describe themselves as not 100% heterosexual or 100% cisgender. And that's a term that was really negative for my generation, but it's been a repurposed term, Tate, and I like it because it's just an umbrella term. But, I involunteered it in Circle. I felt really called, but before I wanted to say anything, and it's back, I didn't want to add to the burdens of these men that I had pastoral responsibility to. I just thought I need to really figure out this space and figure out just as much as I could before I could offer any advice. So I did a lot of listening. And those gay men, and I don't know if they know who they are, if they're ever listening to these things, they really helped me because I just listened. And I didn't prescribe. Because I recognized I might add harm because I really didn't know the space.
How can someone really listen?
Well, my mission president, a guy named Ellis Ivory, who was in his 30s when I was a missionary, so he's alive. I'm 65, and we just had a mission reunion with our mission president alive and his wife, and in their mid-80s. It's crazy. He taught us how to listen. He actually gave us a book. I don't like the title of the book. I love the principles of the book. It's Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. It was mandatory reading in our mission in England, Manchester in 1980. And the principles of that book really helped me to be present for other people. And it taught me when someone opens up about cancer, I don't flip the conversation and talk about my experience with cancer, somebody in my family that has cancer. My job is somebody's vulnerably opened up with something is to ask follow-up open-ended questions and not turn this. At times I could, once I fully heard them, I could turn the story to my experience with cancer, a similar family member, but this discipline to when someone opens up, eliminate the temptation to make it about you or flip the conversation. And you still have to talk and share. It's a balance, but it really helped me to want to listen, ask open-ended questions, and be present. And that's what I felt I did most of the time as a YSA bishop. But my wife would say, what are you doing in all those interviews at the end of the day? And I go, the longer I serve, the more I just listen and ask open-ended questions. And most of the time, the YSAs came to the answer that was best for them, and they owned it better because it wasn't my answer for them. It was their own answer for them. And they felt their own personal revelation. And my job was kind of, at times I'd give them suggestions, and a priesthood blessing's more direct because it's God talking for them. But listening is an underdeveloped skill in Latter-day Saint culture. I think I wrote about this a little bit in the book you've got here. I think my role models were men that spoke in general conference, state conference, and they are generally really good speakers. But I didn't have any role models of men that were great listeners. Those same speakers might have been great listeners, but I was never there to hear them listening. And didn't learn that skill until my mission president invited us to do that. So I think it's an underdeveloped skill in our culture, and it's such an important skill.
I think it's an underdeveloped skill in the whole world.
I think you're right, Tate.
And I don't know why that is, but, especially for younger generations, we live in such a fast-paced environment. Everything's trying to capture your attention on social media, and we live in the attention economy now, right? And it's very, very rare as you go through life that anybody takes a moment and listens to you. It's so rare. And we talked earlier about this idea of medicine. And sometimes just having the ability to just listen to someone and not impose your own stories or judgment is tremendously healing. And I experienced that as I've been meeting with people more and more. It's so rare anybody gets a chance to be heard. And I think it's really amazing that you turned listening into your ministry work. I mean, even your title of the book and your podcast, Listen, Learn, and Love, in that order. I love it. So tell us a little bit more about, once you're listening to people, how are you learning from them?
Well, you're perceptive to pick up on the title. That was really intentional. I brainstormed with a Facebook group about how to name the book and ultimately the podcast. And that was really my own journey of, as a YSA bishop, I had to be willing to listen. And that allowed me to be better ability to learn, and then a better ability to love and love people outside of my normal circle. And so I think that's what Christ taught. But I couldn't love as effectively without doing those first two. And I agree with you. Listening sometimes is the most healing thing we can do for somebody. Mm-hmm. We men, and this is probably to your point, worldwide, we're fix-it people. Mm-hmm. We want to solve things and we want to share ideas on how to fix stuff. And often the most, I love the word you used, healing, Tate. The most healing work we can do is just to help somebody felt totally, and I get emotional, totally understood and totally validated. And I talk to a lot of people who are having difficult relationships, especially queer people with our church or other churches. And I've always felt validating. 10 years ago, I would have thought when anybody opened up about a concern with the church, that if I validated that concern, I was driving any wedge between them and the church deeper. Felt I needed to defend the church and dismiss their concern. And I don't have any therapy training. I'm a business owner by trade. But I just felt impressed that my job as a disciple of Christ was to validate their pain, even if I didn't feel that pain. Mm. Sexual survivors would be a great example. But people with difficult experience with the church, to validate that and not try to dismiss it or say you're overthinking that, or my experience isn't that way. I've never felt that. Yeah. And I think in general, it helps it didn't drive the wedge further between them and the church. It was more healing. And so I think that's an important principle that scales to all the relationships we're trying to improve. And my wife is great about this, is just validating people's experiences, even if she doesn't feel the same experience. She's been just a terrific mother to our kids. We're all walking different roads. We have kids in the church and out of the church. We have adult children at our home. And so we're walking the road of parents with trying to love all of our kids, regardless of the road they're walking. But I do think listening can heal people. I go to a therapist. Same. I've gone to a therapist 3 times in my life. I'm going to a therapist now, and she's terrific, and she's just a great listener. And I don't have to prove anything to her about my experience. And so I love that we need Jesus and we need therapy, and it's been very helpful for me.
That's great.
The last time I went to a therapist was during being a YSA bishop. I ended up getting so sort of emotionally gassed out that I saw a therapist, and I felt embarrassed about that. I remember walking into the therapist's office, this is a tangent, thinking if any of my YSAs saw me walking into, they'd be so disappointed in me. And I feel different now. In fact, I wish I had been open at times about seeing a therapist while serving. I think it would have normalized therapy. Elder Holland talked openly in his Broken Vessel talk about his own journey with emotional health. We just thought more of him, and his vulnerability caused us to be more vulnerable and open. It didn't diminish his ministry. That's kind of a tangent take on a vote for therapy, but
it's
the
great.
things therapists do are terrific.
Maybe you can talk a little bit about the role that therapy's had in your own life a bit more, because it's important. And I talk about therapy a lot on the channel.
Good.
So I think it's good to hear. I mean, you talked about first, men are not always good at listening, right? Or connect with your feelings, or sometimes there's a stigma that if you go to therapy, you're weak or not good enough or something like that, which I think is outdated. But tell us, what was that experience like for you? How did it help you? And what did you learn?
It's a great question. You asked great questions. Her name is Christine, and my brother helped me find her. And I just needed someone to process just the emotional capital I was spending being a YSA bishop. And
maybe you could tell people, not to cut you off, but maybe tell people a little bit about what is involved with that, because not everybody knows, right? You're a minister, a pastor, a bishop in this congregation, but what is the emotional burden like?
Well, I tried. One of the good things about my assignment, or harder things, is I was on social media, because Matt, your fellow missionary companion, was the first guy that got me on social media, especially Twitter. So I was connecting with all the YSAs on social media, and about a third of our ward was active and 2/3 wasn't. And I started to connect with the 2/3 not active through social media and DM him. And a lot of those felt comfortable eventually coming and talking to me, and I was grateful for that. It wasn't a student ward where everybody's active in the church, and it was helpful for me to meet so many people, but then just be present for all those interviews. Sometimes we'd start at 2 or 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and there were just a lot of YSAs that needed help, not only spiritually, but in all sorts of different ways. And I was glad to do all I could, but I recognized my gas tank to be present for all those interviews was low. And so I found this therapist. But one of the interesting things that happened is it didn't take very long before I felt more sustainable. My wife was really helpful. But then I recognized she had skills to help the YSAs I didn't have. And I ended up taking to her, without a name, complex situations that I was facing. And because of her therapy understanding, she gave me principles to help the YSA that no one else did, that weren't in the handbook, weren't in my priesthood leaders. I teased her. I said, "You're like a member of our bishopric now," in an informal way. And she laughed. And there's nothing rogue about that. It was just, and an example is a lot of the really good men and women in our ward were working to solve pornography use. And she taught me the iceberg principle, which applies to so many situations. The iceberg principle is what we see in ourselves or others is what's above the waterline, like pornography use. But if you're really going to solve that long term, you can white knuckle it, or you can sort of say, well, what's really at the bottom of pornography use? It's usually not, I want to offend God today, so I'm going to look at porn. That's my newest way to offend God. I didn't find anybody that felt that way. It was a coping mechanism. It was escape. It was dealing with stress. It was a need for connection. It's a sin, but it wasn't like this evil person. There was actually an incredible person at the bottom of the iceberg that was dealing with complex stuff. This was mostly an escape, and rarely were they addicted, if not at all, at the YSA age, which is different than the labeling we were using. So that was really helpful for me. And I wasn't a therapist that could help the YSAs figure out what the bottom of their iceberg was, but I at least was able to look at it that way in a much more nuanced way, in a much probably more helpful way. And I want to talk about shame at some time in this pod, because that's a real key thing. But it was just, so those two things. The therapist helped me, but she helped a bunch of YSAs. And I've been drawn to therapists since her. It's the first therapist experience when I was a teenager and really helped me. But I've had therapists on the podcast, and I'm so grateful for the work therapists do in our world. And I wish they had more of a voice in our church. I wish there were therapists in the senior councils of the church that could bring their professional experience to more of our content that's developed in our faith.
Yeah, that is a really deep perspective.
And women, for that matter, because this is a female therapist that has a whole worldview coming from a woman.
Yeah, there's a lot to talk about just right there. I wanted to go back to what you had said about people looking at pornography or whatever, kind of sin people call it. When I was growing up, I always learned in our church and many churches, there's commandments. There's kind of the rules that you're expected to abide by. So for me, it was big, don't drink, you don't smoke, you don't have sex before marriage. But all the time, people are still doing those things, right? And I was always taught that it's something about free agency. You have the choice to do that or don't do it. And if you choose to do it, then that's bad. You shouldn't do it. But you talk so much deeper about this idea of shame and what is underneath the iceberg. So maybe you could share a couple stories about what did you recognize as you listened and went deeper? What were people really dealing with that people weren't always seeing?
Well, you ask great questions, and I always pray that I can answer them in a way that's helpful for your listeners that may need some help in this space.
Yeah.
I think shame has no place in the gospel of Jesus Christ. It was no part of Christ's ministry. Shame to me, Brene Brown says, shame says, I am bad versus I did something bad. What a powerful concept, Tate. And it's so consistent with theology of Latter-day Saints that we're children of heavenly parents. And part of that doctrine is I believe nothing anybody can do can take us outside the love of our parents, our heavenly parents. Nothing my kids can do would cause me to stop loving them and want them the best for them. And yeah, we can be disappointed at times, but I think that's really powerful. So when people are messing up, and to your point, everybody messes up, however it's described, and it may happen more in youth than people in their 60s, but people my age mess up too. But it's more of a younger thing, especially initially. I just think you have to look at that is instead of, what am I learning versus what was I thinking? And a wise say bishop can say the same thing versus, I'm disgusted, or I don't think anybody would say that. But I just think of the parable of the prodigal son when he decided to come back. It's the most powerful, I could spend an hour talking about the parable. It's the most powerful parable for me in the scriptures. And it answers the question, when he wanted to come back, he thought he would be a servant. And the Father, who I think represents our heavenly parents or the Savior in the field, Christ set that up during daylight so he could show the Father running towards his Son who was coming back. And there was no groveling, but he put a ring on his finger and a coat on his shoulders. And it forever answers the question, when we come back, do we come back as a son, a daughter, or a servant? Do we come back as sons and daughters? And I imagine, and it stunned the son. He says, Father, why are you treating me this way? I've sinned against heaven, and thee I'm no more worthy to be called thy son. So he had self-determined, I'm going to come back, which was cool.
Yeah.
But he said, I'm going to be a servant. And it's shocking to him, and he had tears in his eyes. And then I imagine the father with his arm around his son on the way back without a single shaming comment. Like, what were you thinking? That was my inheritance. It's, what did you learn?
What did you learn?
And so I just think this messing up stuff, I'll invite people not to mess up, and it's a sin. But I think it's much more important the direction people are going and the things they're learning. And I think sometimes that messing up refines us in a positive, healthy way that helps us understand the atonement and compassion and empathy. And we can speak with authority about the repentance process, and it doesn't disqualify us from our future. Shame wants us to look backwards in a whirlpool of lies and self-loathing, that whatever we're doing and we keep messing up, that we're back to square one. And all the repenting we've done is for naught, and we just reburden the Savior. That is not our theology. We believe in a Savior that loves to forgive and has already paid the price, and we're not reburdening him. We're just taking advantage of a gift he's already paid the price for. So if you look at it in that lens, it doesn't increase the amount of sinning. I think it helps people to realize I'm going to be okay. I'm learning. I'm journaling about this. I'm moving on with my life the best way I can. And worth and worthiness are two different things. Worth is set. Worthiness to fully participate in the church or the temple can come and go, but worth is set. And so that's I think when we look at ourselves as not broken and whole, even if we're not perfect, we do better going forward than from a feeling of brokenness or woundedness or sin. And shame just has no place in that. I've always felt Satan doesn't win when we mess up, but he wins if we can create shame that separates us from ourselves or from the love of our heavenly parents.
I love what you just said, right? Shame, in your definition you just said, separates us from ourselves and from our heavenly parents. That is a profound
thank you.
statement right there, because I'm really interested in this idea of separation. I've learned kind of through my own life and journeys that when we're separated from ourselves, that is what some people describe as soul loss, a loss of self, right? And our real selves, and you emphasized it over and over, is that we're eternal, spiritual sons and daughters of loving parents. And we forget that, and that's what shame is, right? Cutting us off from that true connection, cutting us off from our spiritual selves. So how do you recommend people work through shame if they're stuck in a shame spiral?
Well, sometimes that's a great question. And I think a therapist can help. I think just talking. So I'd say the first answer is talking about it, because I think shame thrives in secrecy and in isolation and in darkness, whether that's literal or figurative. So not talking about it probably adds to the shame. And so maybe some people create a therapy journal or a private journal, not to be read by anybody else. It's not passed down to your posterity. And so sometimes the best someone can do is just write their thoughts down and the reality of their life and the hard parts of their life that they don't want to talk to anybody about. And sometimes that can be really therapeutic to just write out that. And sometimes that can be very de-shaming just to get it out versus keeping it in. I think a therapist, I think prayer, I think hopefully religious leaders, if you feel impressed to talk to a religious leader and have a good experience. But, and I really believe that, if you're a believing person in God, that, and this comes back to my queer friends, because religious institutions have messages that are sometimes create religious shame. And they're shameful for having same-sex attraction or not fitting in the binary narrative of male and female because they're non-binary or trans. And that can create religious shame because they're embarrassed or shameful for who they are, and they have no control to change that, even if they're living all the church teachings. So where was I going with that? Sometimes a therapist, the point is, some of the guests on the podcast said the thing that got me out of my shame about my sexual identity or gender identity was ultimately God. And I went to God and I said, how do you feel about me? And in spite of all these messages from people in position of authority around them, adults or religious leaders, God told them, that he loved them, that they loved them. I sometimes use heavenly parents and use they for heavenly parents because I believe there's a heavenly mother there that loves, her queer children. And then if you believe that God loves you and that you were created intentionally and that every part about you is intentionally created, then the shame can really melt away. I've always felt, a straight person looks in the mirror and doesn't have shame about being heterosexual. And I've always felt a queer person needs to look in the mirror and feel the same way about them and not have any shame for them. It doesn't change any of my church teachings. It just puts everybody on the same moral footing that everybody's created as intended and no one's a mistake. And our society is actually better off for all the beautiful diversity that's part of society. God is pretty diverse. If we look at our world and our geology, all the beautiful things in our world, including the human family, God's pretty diverse. And I think that's part of, so that would be the first thing I'd say is if you're, whatever God looks to you is ask that however you pray, and however you get connected with God, ask God how he feels about you, no matter what it is, if it's sexual orientation or sin. And I think sexual orientation isn't a sin, by the way. I mean, so we kind of talk about these two, but it can create shame. Why sin can create shame. But talk to God and ask how he feels about you. And I think that's one of the most powerful things, plus a therapist, plus friends, and your own meditation, your own journey, I think people do best, and this is one of the reasons I love your platform, where they come to the point where they really love who they are. And the parts about them that sometimes society says aren't lovable, that they actually love. And whatever that is this society has a norm for who we should be sometimes that can be pretty. Brene Brown talks about belonging and fitting in. Fitting in is you look around and you assess a situation to become someone you need to be in order to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. So one of my gay friends talked about the pegboard is full of all these round holes that represents heteronormative world and my straight friends, we're all round pegs and we have round holes, so things work pretty well for us. But if you're a square peg and you're looking for round holes, in the past we might have said, well, just become a round peg, become straight. Mm-hmm. But now the responsibility's on us. I think first for the square peg, back to your point, is to become comfortable you're a square peg. And you're not supposed to be a round peg. And I'm going to read about our common friend, Matt Easton, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, that'd be great.
For anybody, for background, Tate and I and our family have a common friend in Matt Easton, who's a fellow missionary in the Sydney North. Was it 2 missions back in that?
Yeah, that was.
So Matt Easton's a gay Latter-day Saint and just a terrific young man. When you posted on your podcast, you were doing this podcast, this whole platform, it's more than just a podcast. Matt Easton commented, and I screenshot, and I want to just read it. Because what you did for Matt is what we all need to do for each other. Learned some of my greatest lessons from you during our tenure together, Tate. It's like a treasure. I still treasure them all these years later, excited to listen and not surprised that you continue to help and teach others all these years later. And here's this, you're a straight dude, and I couldn't have been so kind at your age to my gay friends, but that's not a problem for you. And it shouldn't be. But your generation's much more comfortable, and you love Matt Easton, and he is so supportive of you. And I sense nothing's changed in relation with Matt Easton as he's walked a different road, not participating in the church, but living his best self. And your relationship with him hasn't changed. My relationship with him hasn't changed. We became aware of Matt through our son, Matt, who was in the mission. My wife went to his homecoming. Just a terrific young man that gave an incredible talk and bless so many people's lives. And Matt, if you're listening, I hope it's okay. You're pretty public with your story. And I can't remember where I'm going on this tangent, but I don't look at Matt as lost. I don't look at Matt as off the path. I just look at Matt as my job is to just love people as they walk their way forward in their life without any judgment. People in my life that aren't participating in the church, I don't look at them anymore as lost or fallen. It's not my job. My job is just to love. Christ saves, I love. And recognize that Matt has really complex road that straight people in our church don't face. And I think when people can feel love, even if they're not in the church anymore, from people in the church, I think they are more likely to make better decisions because they feel love from people. And so their decisions aren't out of anger, out of spite. They're able to feel, the love of people around them, so they make better decisions as they're making their journey forward. That was a tangent for your listeners. I can't remember your original question.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it all stemmed from the question about shame.
Yeah.
Right. And how do you deal with it? And I so appreciate everything that you've been saying, because there are many people within our own LDS church, but so many different churches around the world who don't feel the belonging And that was a nice distinction you drew, but I can't remember the exact words you said. What was it?
Yeah. And that's good to circle back to that because it's a Brene Brown quote.
Mhm.
Fitting in is you assess a situation or you become something you need to be in order to be accepted.
Okay.
So I use the example when I talk about Levi 501 jeans in high school. That was the thing. And I didn't like Levi. This is a minor thing, but I wore Levi 501 jeans because that's what everybody did at Highland High School in 1979. And I didn't really like Levi's. But belonging doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. So a lot of my queer friends come out not to like leave the church, or it's just like they need people to know they will still love them if they know this part about them. And it's really brave. And for then people in the family, in the faith community, in society say, I still love you. And now that I know this part about you, it's not like, and nothing's changed. And that can be so de-shaming because they play these conversations in their mind about if I come out, what will my parents think? What will my siblings think? And that scales all sorts of things that we might feel shame about that are just part of our identity. Our number one identity, I agree, is children of heavenly parents. But to just say you should stop there and not talk about the rest of your identity creates shame.
Mm-hmm.
It may make me feel comfortable because I don't want to know anything about anybody, or I don't want to recognize there's queer people around that, complicate. How does that work for them? So queer people coming out is often about belonging and not having to be something they want, because everybody asks them, when are you dating? And they get exhausted with, who are you dating? When are you going to get married as they age up in their 20s? And if they know they're gay, then they quit asking those questions usually, and they can be authentic.
Yeah.
At least they're not hetero. They're usually not, they may not, every gay person's journey is different. I don't want to say they're going to go this way, or this way. But that's so, belonging is something I think our church has talked more about. There's been more talks about belonging, room at the inn for everybody. And I think that's such an important thing. And one of the things I wish I'd done as a father growing up is actually had conversations with our kids of how we'd respond. So if you're not 100% heterosexual, first of all, this is what that means maybe at the junior high level when they're exposed to this. And this is how I respond as your father. And you take all that angst out of their brain ahead of time. And they know, okay, if I actually conclude I'm queer, I already know how my parent's going to feel about this. So I can so you as a parent can walk that road with your kid. Some of the research says that a kid will walk that road alone for almost a decade without coming out to anybody. It's probably less now. And parents grieve because they realize their kid had walked this road for so long, and the shame that creates by not being able to talk about something so important to them. Other things like if you're cheating at high school, you shouldn't be doing that, but this is how I respond. If you're messing up in some way with the law of chastity in our church and you want to talk about that with me, this is how I respond, so that I can walk with you. I think some of the best parenting moments are not where our kids were at their best, but felt open to be able to open up about the realities of their life, whether that was sin related or identity related. And I think that scales to church leaders and creating a culture and a ward or a young men's or young women's where there's this safe place to talk about real things. And not everybody, and versus kind of have to come to church and present your perfect self and kind of mask what's really going on in your life. And that can be exhausting. You don't feel like you belong. So belonging is really an important thing that's sometimes hard in church. A lot of people really belong. They fit all the check boxes and they really belong and it works great for them. And other people, it's not helpful it's sometimes really hard for them to feel like they really belong if they were actually authentic with who they are.
That is really great. Yeah, I love that statement about this is how I will respond. I'm thinking about, you got my brain turning because I have the two little girls who you met, and our oldest girl is getting to the point where it's almost time for me to start having some of those conversations with her about whatever, right? If she feels bad about something at school or something that happened to her, this is how I will respond. I'll be open to you and love you. And that's just really great wisdom. I wanted to circle back on one other thing you said, which I loved. You said that God is very diverse. That is so cool. So tell me, in all your ministry, what are some of the different ways that you've seen diversity appear throughout all the people that you work with, right? Obviously, we talk about, race and sexual orientation, these things, but, what do you recognize?
Well, I recognize as a Latter-day Saint male in my mid-60s, I have a lot of privilege. And Brene Brown's taught me about privilege in a way that no one else ever has. And I recognize that I'm sort of in the bullseye of privilege. What that means, I just have more standing in my faith community. And I think, what am I going to do with that responsibility? And I felt impressed, as you've talked about and with the podcast, to give voice to other people that have less privilege. And I think right now of women that have come on the podcast and have talked about what it's like to be in a patriarchal world, church, what it's like sometimes to be a woman, and how their voices are sometimes less heard. And I always thought I did a good job with that space, but now listening to more women, I recognize there's a lot of pain for some incredibly wonderful women. Other women are fine. So there is nuance within that. I forgot your original question already, but
I was asking about diversity.
But
you said God is diverse.
I think God is diverse in that he wants women to have more chance to lead. And we make better decisions. In my professional experience, where there is no patriarchy, we have more women than men in our company. And the joint decision-making by having women having an equal seat at the table and the diversity with gender between men and women help our company make better decisions. And right now, women have less chance to impact decisions in my faith. And I'm uncomfortable about that because I think we'd do better if women had more chance to be heard.
Mm.
And I remember once in a ward council, because I had some training we were discussing an elders quorum issue, and the Relief Society president, I said, what do you think about this issue? And she didn't want to respond because it was a men's issue. It was the elders quorum. But I said, what do you think? And she had some incredible insights that helped us counsel together and make a better decision, because her insight, even though she's not an elder, she doesn't go to elders quorum. So I think of diversity, and the first thing that came to my mind is the importance of listening to women's voices as equal. One of my podcast guests came on and talked about our theology is divine equality.
Mm.
Heavenly parents, an equal co-creator, and a heavenly father and a heavenly mother. But often our policy, perhaps our doctrine, doesn't match that. And so I hope that we as a faith, and I'm not an activist saying this is what the church should do, or I don't agree, but I'm hopeful that as we get more light and understanding, that will better elevate the voices of women. I'm uncomfortable. I would just be honest. I mean, I sat in our sacrament meeting, and in our ward conference, we sustain everybody from the top of the church to the local leaders. There were about 28 male names read before we had the first female name read. And 10 years ago, I wouldn't have even heard that.
Mm.
I wouldn't even, as a dude, back to my privilege, that would have felt, what's the big, that would have felt just fine to me. But if I'm a woman or a young woman hearing 28 names of men read by all the other organizations I can be a part of, that would never happen. That causes me to wonder about my place here and the importance of my voice. So I hope that we just improve in that area and to match our theology, which is divine equality. I think marriages can do that because for those of you that are married, we can better role model that sometimes in a marriage, and make sure we're treating our partner as an equal co-creator and be flexible enough to see different roles for different people. Back to diversity, ethnic diversity is one I love, and just the beautiful diversity. The term Zion, Tate, I think a lot about. Zion to me, because I grew up near Hoglesoo in Salt Lake, was sameness. Or anybody knows that area, we all had rambler houses. All the women didn't work. All the men worked. We all went to church together. We're all Latter-day Saints. I think everybody was straight, at least until I realized later that everybody wasn't straight. And I can't say that word ideologic, that word idyllic. I can't quite say that word. It was great. I loved, but I thought Zion was sameness, and socioeconomic was kind of the same. We're all the same age. There was no black people. There was no anybody but white people. And as I've aged up, I believe Zion is unity and diversity. And Elder Cook has even talked about that, using that term. And I think we can accomplish more to bless the lives of other people by taking all this diversity, and we can accomplish more than just in sameness. So my gay friends, my trans friends, my black friends, my people that are here legally, people that are here illegally, we're all part of the same human family. We're united as our desire to lift the burdens of others. I think we can do more. So much of the gospel is what I call the horizontal part of our baptism commandments, the vertical, the one that goes sideways. It's bear, mourn, and comfort the waters of Mormon. And so much of the gospel to me is, what are we doing to help others? And I think Zion is not sameness. I think Zion is diversity. And I think God has intentionally created diversity because he loves diversity. And he knows we can bless each other more in our diversity than our sameness. I used to think, I'm going on a tangent here where I'm thinking some of these, the gathering of Israel, I'd like to talk about that a little bit, because that's a phrase term. And for those of you that are LDS, I think still about missionaries going to Australia like you all, Matt did, and Matt Easton and some the others I know from that mission, and finding people that are looking for, the healing that's in our restored gospel and the unique doctrine. But I also think the gathering of Israel is our own people, Latter-day Saints that have been scattered with people like me that have said unkind things in the past. And I've actually scattered Israel with the things I've said and thought about queer people or women or black people or Hispanic people. And so I think the gathering of Israel is partly our own people. And I get emotional here because I'm partly in this space of repentance for who I was before and the pain I probably created in people with my uninformed opinions, or the feeling of sameness that I thought was, and now I want to do a better job of gathering Israel, because it's this beautiful, diverse human family that are part of Israel that have been scattered and have left my faith because of the things that we sometimes say about them. And then as they leave, we say even sometimes more unkind things about them. Makes it hard to feel our love. So that's a little bit of tangent, and so I think of hastening the work, another buzz term sometimes in our faith. And hastening the work to me is helping queer people feel like they belong and are needed more. And maybe most importantly, and it's absolutely true, that we're better off with them. Elder Brown, for those of you that are LDS, and I realize your platform is broader than LDS, he's somebody that gave a talk. He's a black man that gave a talk in General Conference in October of 2025. It's a General Authority 70. I think and he gave one of the best talks in General Conference. And he's black. And I thought, where we've come as a church, in the 50s or 60s, it would have been unimaginable for us to sit in conference and imagine a black man could give priesthood holder, because he couldn't have the priesthood until 78. And then we see him for who he is, because he's given the chance. And he's strengthened our faith community because of his insights in the gospel of Jesus Christ. And people were drawn to his talk. But as he was speaking, I didn't hear it live. I heard it later. I may have been running a St. George Marathon that day, which is a good excuse to not listen to conference. But I can't remember if it was the next day or the day after I was traveling. But anyway, I thought of my gay friends. And I thought, will there ever be a day where an openly gay, lesbian, or transgender person, whatever that means, open, they're just out, and they speak in General Conference? And because I've heard them on the podcast, and I've been so moved with their spirit that they will have a platform to give a conference talk, just like Elder Brown did. And will we all drive home from that talk and go, wow, I was so moved by that transgender Latter-day Saint or that gay Latter-day Saint. And that's, there's a song that says, I have a dream. I can't sing for your listeners. And that's one of my dreams. I can't even remember the lyrics, And I don't think I'll see that in my lifetime, to be honest, being 65, but I hope my grandkids can see that. And to me, that's part of the beautiful diversity of God's family being represented in that platform, General Conference, and the ability of my queer people, because I've seen it first. I've been changed more by people outside my normal circle in the last 10 years than people in my normal circle. I've learned more about the gospel of Jesus Christ, compassion, empathy, kindness from people outside of my normal circle. And it stretched me at times, and it's caused me to sort of repent. And I'm not at the finish line by any means, and I'm not ready to, so that's sort of the beautiful diversity I hope is represented better with voices that we don't. I use that platform at General Conference because it's kind of like the platform in the LDS faith. Yeah. If you're speaking at General Conference, it's super, that's a big deal. And I wish there was just more variety of people that spoke and more lived experiences and more of Heavenly Father's family that was represented in our faith community in that kind of environment.
Amazing. And everything would be better for it.
Yeah.
This is a little bit of a deeper question, but it kind of drilling down into the idea of diversity. You mentioned that God is diverse. Why does God want diversity, in your opinion?
So this is you, Tate, asking questions. As a side note, I showed the questions you had for me to my son, Matt, your missionary companion, my son. He says, this is Tate Arnold asking big questions. You didn't disappoint him. You're not disappointing me. And this is why your platform is so important. And people need to hear you and your platform. And we're going to have you on our podcast so more people our listeners can connect with you in the work you're doing. I think your question is, why does God, ask that question again, why does God value diversity?
Why does God want diversity?
Well, the first thought that came to my mind, there's no doctrinal foundation for this, is God maybe is really diverse. The image I have of God is a white, straight man. But I don't think doctrinally we've ever said for sure he's male. We've never said anything else about anything other part of him. So maybe God is a lot more diverse than the visual imagery that's been created as a youth growing up. When I first saw pictures of, maybe the first picture I saw of God was Joseph Smith's first vision of a white Heavenly Father and a white Jesus, men with white skin and white hair. And so that creates a visual image. I'm thinking about this for the very first time, by the way, as you asked this great question. Maybe that's sort of how I've imagined God, and maybe God is a lot more diverse than that. I don't know. And so maybe all this diversity in the human family is somehow represented in God that I, as a mortal mind, can't comprehend, because I can't comprehend that. And so when I get emotional, because you're asking me to think about things, maybe, my queer friends can find, if they really knew the character of God, would find a God that understands them, whatever that means. I don't know. And we have this theology that we have a Heavenly Mother, and that's part of the beautiful diversity. We understand that it's not just a single God, but a heavenly parents. So, boy, that just got me thinking. I think God's more diverse than my mortal mind, and I've been probably biased because of the visual imagery I've used to understand God. We're better as a faith to have a Jesus that's not white. I think we know that Jesus grew up in a place in the world that he wasn't white. Mm-hmm. He had this beautiful olive skin and dark hair, and so we're doing better that way with some of the visual imagery we're creating about Christ, because we have more of an understanding. But wow, God's bigger than, and I think he's diverse, to answer your question, and then he would value diversity, because all the human family is the best representation of God. That would be my theology. A guy like me, everybody, we're all divine children of heavenly parents. And that can really lower the temperature when we see people like that. My fear of other people has significantly decreased over the last 10 years. I have far less fear of people than I used to, because I've just gotten to know so many people outside of my normal circle. And that's been relieving. And I have less, and so that's been a positive thing. But It's a great question.
Maybe something to think about a little more.
It's a great question.
That's awesome. One other thing I was thinking about, you had mentioned about General Conference, and if you thought there would be, someone from LGBT community speaking, you said maybe not in my lifetime. And it makes me think about that old parable that a society grows great when older people plant trees. How does that go? That shade they'll never sit in, right?
Yeah.
And you've been out here doing this work, planting all these seeds and growing these trees, cultivating people. It makes me think about, your grandfather in your 60s, you're an elder. What kind of world do you hope to build for the next generation?
Well, I hope for a kindler, gentler world. I'm really uncomfortable where we are politically. I don't know if I should go politically, but I'm uncomfortable.
You can go politically.
I wrote an Instagram, Facebook post, a letter to my grandchildren if they wondered how I'd feel about Trump and the current administration. And I wanted my grandchildren to know how I felt in 2026. And I voted Republican in the past and may vote Republican in the future, but I'm uncomfortable with Trump, and not all the time with this policy, but I'm uncomfortable with the rhetoric and sort of building a case off of marginalized groups of people. And perhaps my biggest fear is not necessarily the policies, but I worry about young people that are looking for a role model of success and a way to get ahead, and are drawn to the tactics of Trump, which to me are opposite from the gospel of Jesus Christ and the Savior. And so that really concerns me, because I think I'm worried we're creating a whole generation of people that believe this is the way to get ahead, to be whatever terms you use. And sure, there's been Democrats that have done the same. So I'm trying to be politically careful here to not alienate any of your listeners that voted for Trump. But that's just, I'm not against anybody that voted for Trump. I'm worried about the impact of society post-Trump. And I hope that other political leaders step forward and can have lead with a policy-based decision with that on the back. So there's no fear-based narrative. They're not coming after us. It's not the election of our lifetime. It's not trans people. They're the latest group that's caught in the crosshairs of, they're coming after us and they're trying to, and it's just fear-based. So I hope for a kinder, gentler world. And the greatest hope I have lies with young people. My wife and I serve as a ministering couple in our YSA ward. It's been fun to be back in a YSA ward, and the YSAs are just terrific. I listen to their testimonies. I listen to their talks. They're so focused on Christ and love and compassion and empathy. There's very little fear-based rhetoric in their talks. They're different talks than my generation gives in my home ward. They're both groups are giving doctrinally sound talks, but they've shifted a little bit. And the younger people I meet with are, and so I have a lot of hope for the future of our world because of younger and people my age. I don't want to just create this binary that younger people have got it all
You want to be non-binary about it?
Yeah, exactly. So I have a lot of hope with younger people that are want to create a kindler, gentler world, a more inclusive world, and recognize those are the values that are really important to me. And so I have a lot of hope for the future. And a group I like to talk about a little bit is people who have left our church. As we mentioned at the first, we have several children that are no longer participating in the church, including your missionary companion, my son, Matt.
My best friend.
And how do I process that? Well, I just love Matt. And I love my friends who felt their best path is not to be in the church. And I've thought sometimes there's more tension. Sometimes there's less tension between someone who's never been in the church, a fellow Christian, and we invite them to speak at BYU and we have them on podcasts and we're okay with that. But someone who's left our faith is really hard. And I don't want to minimize that for parents because we grieve and we wonder where that kid's going to be in the next life and what it means for eternal family. But I've learned to just leave that all at the Savior's feet. My job is to love. His job is to save. My job is to prefer, really important principle. My job is to preserve the relationship. I can't control the outcome. So my job with people I love, and I have so many people I love that don't participate in the church, is just to love them. And to me, that's the doctrine of Christ. And it's relieving, Tate, because I'm not responsible to save everybody that's stepping away from the church or that never joined the church. I'm just can love people, and it's relieving for me, and not to see them through the lens, are they going to have a seat at the same table I'm going to have in the next life? Or are we going to be different kingdoms? Or are we going to be separated? Just don't do that. I think our heavenly parents are pretty loving and want everybody to come back that wants to come back. Our doctrine in our church is actually, can you move between kingdoms in the next life? I researched that, and the last statement was in the First Presidency in the 1960s. We have no official statement if you could move between kingdoms in the next life. That doesn't mean eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow you can move between kingdoms. It just means we don't understand a lot about the next life. And we that are Latter-day Saints can, because of our theology, be pretty, it takes a while, but just be at peace that there are people we love that may be walking a different road. And our job is, and it's a two-way street, because some kids that leave the church want their parents to leave with them. And I think a better way forward is just let everybody write. I like this idea of, and I invite my queer friends to do it, is at the end of the day, you got to write your own story if you're queer. I'll always invite you to stay in the church and follow church teachings, but I'll invite you to write your story. Do that when you're personal best. Don't do that when you're angry and mad and feeling broken. But at some point, you've got to write your own story. You're going to be in a same-sex marriage, a mixed orientation marriage. You're going to be celibate. Please don't die by suicide. Take that off the table. And you're going to come to these crossroads and write that story when you're your personal best. Don't write out of anger to the church, or don't write it because you see someone else's story. Write it because of your own personal revelation and what you think is best for you, and I'll walk with you. I won't make you the hero one day for being in the church and the villain next day for being out. My love for you, and yeah, your ability to participate in the church may change, but my love for you won't change. And I think people, if they feel that, even if they're contemplating leaving the church, I think they'll make better decisions. Not necessarily they'll come back to the church, they'll just feel like people love them. And if they do feel their future may change, they're more likely to sort of don't have to dig in their heels and prove that they made the right decision. They might be more likely to do a course correction, but my love isn't so someone will come back to the church. My love is just because they deserve to be loved.
They deserve to be loved. Man, everyone deserves to be loved.
For sure.
Yeah.
But I do have hope for the future, to answer your question, and I believe in a kinder, gentler world, and I have hope in the future of our church to do better in some of these spaces where I'm just not comfortable where we are, women and queer people in particular.
I'm feeling the power of everything that you're saying. And it means a lot to me. I'm thinking about, I just feel like that's a message that people don't hear very often. And I think it's a bigger message than just our LDS faith. There are so many people all over the world who, what do they say? The largest religious growing demographic is spiritual but not religious, or something like that. Because a lot of people, I think, for a long time have felt like they don't belong, just like you talked about. And you mentioned how you felt like you were continually repenting for anybody that you had pushed out when you had not yet, come to this perspective you have now. And I feel like from my platform, I'm like you. I don't really care if people are in a church, out of a church, spiritual or not. I just want everyone to know that they're loved and to recognize that whoever they are children of those very diverse heavenly parents like you talked about. And everyone is beautiful and everyone is walking their own journey. And just like you said, our job is to honor those people and walk alongside them, right? We don't get to make the choices for people or put judgment on them. Just need to love them and try to understand where they're coming from and support them. And there's something more holistically beautiful about that experience. And it takes so much pressure off of everybody. It's so much easier to love someone than to fear someone.
For sure.
Just like you talked about.
And I think one of the things for those of you, people you love that are out of the church or have left the church, we've had to reconstruct our relationships. So the church would normally be a big part of the conversation. And now if people aren't participating in the church, that may not be the best thing to be talking about. And so you have to reconstruct. My father and my oldest brother did this the best. My oldest brother left the church, and my dad and him just reconstructed a relationship around things that they found in common, because they both wanted to have a relationship. But it couldn't be about my brother coming back to the church or him being lost or sending him conference talks or quotes. That was just going to drive the wedge further. But they just sort of manned up with each other and said, we want to have a relationship. And so they had this beautiful relationship. And one of the fruits of that, Tate, was when my 92-year-old father died, his 68-year-old son, who's not Mormon, has lived this incredible life as a history professor in Oregon, spoke at the funeral. And he said, well, we didn't exactly read from the same newspaper, but he just gave this beautiful talk. And it was so moving for everybody in the congregation. It was the talk they generally talked about. And he looks like a professor, he's in a, and I just thought they role modeled that so well. And I have done the same with our family. And so it takes two sides to do that. But the relationship can't just be about my job is to get someone to come back to the church, because that will usually just drive them further away. It's more, I'm going to leave this at the Savior's feet and preserve the relationship. And you have to navigate new norms, how are you going to handle this and open, honest communication is the best. I want to circle back to our own marriage, because I sometimes talk about my wife and I, when we met at BYU down the road here from where we're recording, I came out to her as politically left in 1988, and she came out to me as not politically left, right. And I wanted to be open with her, but 35 years later, we were married in 1990, I'm still politically left center and she's still politically right. And we think that's a strength of our marriage. I would be disappointed if she suddenly saw things politically the way I did. And we've had to sort of navigate the complexities of that. We try to turn to media that's fact-based versus fear-based. Neither of us watch cable news, which is mostly bagging on the other side with fear-based narratives. So we don't have our head in the sand. So we stay informed, but it's usually more fact-based media. And I really believe that for your listeners. I would be disappointed if my wife saw things politically the way I did. And I look at our marriage back to we're completely unified in the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're completely unified in raising our kids. And we look at this as a strength of our marriage. And so I think that scales to other things. We naturally want sameness. Our values, one of the guys that came on the podcast talked about counseling couples that are stressed out about differences. And often what he'll do is talk about getting couples to talk about their values before they talk about their beliefs. This is Andy Newman, credit to Andy Newman, who's out of the church, and his wife is in the church, and he's a therapist, and he teaches this, and he walks the walk. But he says, my wife and I want to keep our marriage together. That's a goal, even though he's transitioned out of the church. And so we had to write down all the values we share. And they share the same values: compassion, empathy, wanting the best for their kids, honesty, integrity. And her beliefs are different than his beliefs of how to make that work. So they focus on the values, and the other beliefs cause some tension, but they always go back to we share the same values. Super powerful, because a lot of listeners and a lot of your work and a lot of the reality of life is we're navigating relationships with people that have different beliefs. But often we get to the same values, we can find common ground. And it's back to Brene Brown. People are hard to hate, close up, move in. And this binary, she talks about people are either against us or for us. Either you're all in or you're all out. I don't like that anymore. I don't think it creates any nuance where you can actually find, I hope you have time for another tangent.
Yeah, you just keep going.
I had a pastor
this is gold.
I had a pastor on the podcast, Jamie White, who talked about being a sexual assault survivor as a high schooler and keeping the baby and talking about forgiveness. And I thought, well, this isn't theoretical for you, it's real. But then we were talking later in the podcast about the compass idea. And this is a mechanical compass that an architect would use where there's 2 foots. And one of my institute teachers, Michael Wilcox, talked about the compass. And he says for Latter-day Saints, we can put our one compass in our faith tradition. That's 1 foot. And the next foot is kind of where we can keep that right next to our current foot. And that may feel really comfortable for us. Or we can extend that leg out. And we're still fixed in our faith community, but we're extending that next leg out and thinking, what can I learn from other faith communities? Holy envy is a C.S. Lewis term, but a term that he's used. What holy envy can I have from other faith traditions? Or people with no faith, what can I learn from an atheist about being present right now? Because I actually don't believe in the next life. And it was fascinating. And then I thought of, she's doing the same thing because she's building bridges with the Latter-day Saint community in her faith tradition. And she's got her fixed foot in the First Presbyterian faith, but she's extending her other foot. And then I thought about the 2 circles that we both are drawing and the intersection that we have and how beautiful that intersection is because it's all the things we share in common. And instead of bunkering down in our own bunkers and throwing bombs at each other, symbolic bombs between our faiths, who's right and who's wrong and who's really following Christ, I think we do better when we try to extend the foot. Doesn't mean we leave our faith community. Some do, but it means we're trying to work together to find common ground. And it's back to this diverse God that I think loves that and loves us creating intersections with these compasses that help heal us and help bring us together.
That's a great analogy. Great analogy. As I think about it, probably the parts that overlap are far more significant than the outside parts.
True.
Those would be our values you're talking about, right? Rather than our beliefs, so to speak.
For sure.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. What do you define as values in your own marriage that are important to you and Sheila? If Mama Ostler, your Papa Ostler. And what are some of the beliefs that, maybe you both
Good
hold on to?
Good question. My wife leads on a lot of these. I married, the best woman I ever dated. I married the best woman I know, and she is just, and so when I think of her values, it's the things I fell in love with her. There's the romantic attraction, obviously, but then there's this, she is so kind. So kindness, empathy, compassion. She's also a woman of great integrity. She's very consistent with her core. And her life reflects her core and her values. She's really good about, I don't know what to call this as a value, as a belief. She's a very committed Latter-day Saint. But she loves the good in other religions. She has always loved the cross. She grew up in Texas. Her family's converts. So her family is deeply Christian and deeply connected to the cross. And she's always loved the cross and worn it at times. She's wearing it right now. And so I love that about her. And I love that we can wear the cross a little bit more. And it reflects that belief of wearing the cross reflects the value of I'm Christian or I love Christ. So if you're listening, and I'm probably not giving you a good enough answer, but the values we have are honesty, integrity, compassion, empathy. I think sometimes they're the Christ-like attributes we talk about and preach my gospel that are the foundation of our marriage. And the beliefs are kindness to everybody. We love everybody. We try to listen to everybody. We try to, be honest with everybody. And those would be some of the beliefs. Now, obviously, there's difference in political beliefs between the two of us. And we voted for people. I don't think we usually vote for the same people.
Mm.
So there's beliefs, political beliefs that are different, but they come from the same values. We're both trying to vote for the candidates that reflect the values. So that's what humanizes her differences in politics for me, is I recognize we're coming from the same foundation of love.
Awesome. Yeah. Great way to think about it. That's awesome. As we're kind of getting towards the end here, I want to ask you, what advice would you give to anybody who right now feels like they don't have a place in, could be the church community here or any community, someone who just feels like they're, walking a path on their own?
Well, I'm sensitive. I'm going a slightly different direction. I'm sensitive to those that may feel this so much they're suicidal.
Yeah.
And
because I know about your foundation and everything you do. So I want to ask you about all that.
So, if you're suicidal, you've got, you've got to live. You've got to find a way to get help. It's feelings of being suicidal is not a moral failure. It's an emotional challenge that's real. You shouldn't feel shame about that. It's just where you are. And it can be pretty logical why you're that way, especially if you're queer or trans and you're getting so many messages that people like you aren't needed or welcome in society. So you've got to find a way to live. One trans person told me there's no light at the end of the tunnel. Like I said, well, can you see the light at the end of the tunnel? There's no light. That was pretty sobering to hear that. But I think your older self would always be glad you lived. And so think of your older self, and maybe your older self can talk to you and just fill you with hope that just take it a day at a time. That everybody I've met with that's suicidal and has been able to live has told me they're glad they lived. And one of the things they're able to do is they know how to help other people that are suicidal. You're the wounded warriors, you're the wounded healers, because you've walked the road of feeling suicidal and feeling there's no hope in a society. And so you sometimes are the very best at walking others out of that same desert, because you know the desert. It's not theoretical for you, it's personal. And you've been able to find stability in your life and hope in your life. And that may be one of the greatest blessings you'll ever feel, is to be able to help somebody else that's suicidal find hope, because you can give them hope because you know what it was like to be there. So if you're in that spot, you've just got to find a way to live. Society is better off with you. I think maybe more importantly, you'll just be better off, and you have things to give society that you may not see right now. So that's the first answer. I forgot the question now.
No, it's great. Yeah.
Just, what was the question, Tate? Just
anybody who's feeling like they don't belong.
Don't belong. I would, the next thing I'd say is, that's a legitimate feeling. If somebody dismisses that feeling in you, that's not true. If you don't feel you belong, that's true. If that's the way you feel, don't feel shame for feeling you don't belong. And don't feel it's your fault or that you've done something wrong.
Mm.
And just kind of own that without shame. And the next thing I do is just try to find places you do belong. And that can be in your faith community, in a different faith community, in no faith community. It can be with therapists. It can be with friends. But you've got to find places you belong, and you can be your authentic self without judgment. It's safe places, what people call them. And that's going to look different for everybody. But I think the God that I believe in will help you find those places. Therapists can be that place. And go slow. It may be a bit of a journey. But everybody that I talk to, the most experience I have with queer people walking this road, but you could be a straight person walking this road, to Tate's question. A lot of straight people that don't feel like they belong. So I don't want to just say it's the queer community for a number of reasons. I think you just can go slow and find your spaces. I feel I belong much more in the YSA ward right now than I do in my home ward. And so that's been a real blessing for us. My wife has felt she's belonged in both wards. It's been harder for me to be in my resident home ward. Just the culture there is a little different, and the things we say sometimes are a little different. And so I haven't felt real belonging there for a while. And as a boundary, I finally, just in my own journey of not always feeling like I belong, I quit going to elders quorum. Not because I don't believe in the church, because that was not a helpful meeting for me. And most of the time it would be, but there could just be comments made about people I care about that were hard on me. And I didn't ever say anything, so I just kind of pretended a phone call came to my ear and I'd walk out. And I finally just quit going. And that was a way for me to find a boundary. Always went to sacrament meeting just to find a boundary that worked for me to feel perhaps a little more belonging, or at least separate from spaces that were hard on me. Then I remember going to elders quorum the first time in the YSA ward, and a young man named Tate Steele taught the lesson in his 30s, and it just healed me. It's the first time I've been in elders quorum in 5 years. And he just talked about, instead of transactional relationships, he talked about transformational relationships. And he talked about Christ in a way that just resonated with me so much. And so it wasn't about not going to elders quorum or not having a testimony. It was about, and I felt I didn't have to say anything in that elders quorum. I just felt I belonged there because of the culture in that elders quorum. So that's just me being vulnerable, listeners, that I've had to develop boundaries to sometimes feel like where I belong and safe places that were for me and not. And just as my making my journey forward to just kind of navigate this authentically and what works for me or not. So I'm not inviting anybody to stop going to elders quorum now or Relief Society, but I'm trying to teach a principle using my own story of just, you've got to navigate belonging, whether it's in your faith community or society or at work, in a way that works for you. And you may have to do stuff that people raise an eyebrow about. No one's ever challenged me on why I don't go to elders quorum. It never cost me a temple recommend. It's not a temple recommend question. So I didn't ever, and maybe that's back to my privilege, that who's going to challenge a 65-year-old former YSA bishop why he's not going to elders quorum? And I recognize that's privilege that somebody else may be challenged on, or even their temple recommend threatened. So there's just nuance around all that, Tate.
That's great. And thank you for sharing that very vulnerable story. You know, it's funny that you haven't gone for 5 years. I don't know anybody who wants to go. Yeah, that's great. Well, I love that idea about belonging. I love the idea about, whoever you are, we need you.
Yeah.
Right. We need you. The world needs you. And you're valuable for who you are. You don't have to change who you are to try to fit in, just like you talked about. And I love the openness you give to people to say, man, go find the places where you do belong. If that's not in a church or a faith community, that's fine. You don't look down on that in any kind of way. Because I'm thinking about a lot of people that I know that feel like they don't belong in any kind of way. Mm-hmm. And when you don't feel like you belong, you don't feel connected.
Mm-hmm.
You don't feel connected to yourself, don't feel connected to God like you talked about. And establishing that connection is what brings life and vitality to you. And when you can live authentically, that's when you can make an impact in the world, right? You can't do anything when you're not feeling like your own self. So very, very profound message. And I appreciate you sharing that. Maybe I want to ask you one last question if you have time. Do you still have time?
Sure.
Okay. So this will be the very, very last question that we get into. But this question is all about the idea of calling, which we kind of talked about when we started. And you've walked a very cool life. You've developed your own belief systems and worked through your own faith and your own questions. And you came to this point, maybe 10 years ago when you started podcasting and your serving as a YSA bishop. And you saw very clearly for you that there was this calling to help the people who'd been put on the margins. So how did you develop that specific calling? And what does it feel like as you've moved through it over these last 10 years?
That's a great question. And so towards the end of being a YSA bishop, as part of learning a better hard drive, I started on social media connecting with queer people. I reconnected with a queer guy that's married to a dude in high school that I just kind of stayed away from. We went out to dinner. but maybe more impactfully, it was Allison, Paul, and her husband, George. Allison runs an Instagram account and has a gay son, and I started to follow her on Instagram. And then one day in June of 2015, she posted about her son, Stockton, who died by suicide. And she said he was a square peg in a round hole and suffered immensely. And then she, at the end of it, she said, I invite you all to choose love. This is the day after Stockton died by suicide. Instagram's our happy place. And she put a picture of this kid in Davis County, teenager, and they were doing everything they could to love this kid. The parents are doing great, but it's harder. The society was not, and the church was not. And I just felt a spiritual impression to become an ally. That this is where God wanted me to serve. The song that got me on my mission to England was I'll go where you want me to go, dear Lord. Can't sing that one either. And that's the song, my mantra song, that got me to be an LGBTQ ally. And I recognized there'd be a cost to this. I think I recognized that I had been kind of hardwired that my worth as a Mormon male would be related to my church callings. That's how we talked in our family growing up. And I got kind of hardwired to measure my worth by church callings and sort of imagined like siblings and parents and grandparents that I was now a bishop, that I might be a stake president one day. Could I be a mission president one day? And part of that was because it was how I measured my own worth. And part of it was I wanted to serve people and actually bless people. And I think I recognized on some level, God kind of said to me, I've got enough men to feel those things. I need you to be in this space. And I didn't know I'd write a book. I didn't know I'd do a podcast. That all came line upon line, but I just felt I needed to be an ally. And I started to post about this subject on social media. I put pride flags as a YSA bishop in my social media, which is even more worse now because we banned the pride flag by the U.S. government, by the Utah government in public buildings. Right. So there's this kind of war on the pride flag. But I did that way back and it was interesting. This is a tangent back to us teaching a principle. When I put the pride flag in my bios as a YSA bishop, actually no more queer members came out. But several straight men said, okay, I can talk to that guy. If he's going to be openly kind to gay people, he can handle what I need to talk to him about. So what a fascinating principle. If you want to create a culture where people open up to you, talk nicely about people that are out, and then people know you can open up to them. And they know that ahead of time. But anyway, I just felt called. And Steve Young, who wrote the foreword, became a bit of a mentor to me. He found me and we crossed paths, and he's been a mentor to me in this space, completely supportive of the church and completely supportive of queer people. His wife's brother is gay, so we had proximity to this space, and it's been a terrific mentor to me. It's the only famous person I know and friends with. And the book, Listen, Learn, and Love, that you've got a cover of, look at that cover.
Do you want to hold it?
Well, this is the cover of the book, and Listen, Learn, and Love, and it's got a big heart, but all these are stock photos except Stockton Power. With the permission of his parents, we put his picture in this book right there to honor him, and all the proceeds for everything I do. I was in a position financially to self-fund the podcast and self-fund the book, and all the royalties, and I'm not trying to elevate myself, all the royalties go to everything I do that has a royalty related goes to Stockton Power's Memorial Foundation. And so I'm in this space because of Stockton and this beautiful young man that died by suicide because he was a square peg, didn't fit in a round hole, and suffered immensely, to use his mother words, and he did suffer. And if I dismiss that as a Latter-day Saints, I'm not honoring my discipleship. And so that's been my journey, is just trying to do what I can in my circle of influence. And that's mostly been, there's 3 books I've written. The first one is the most popular one. And this isn't too much about me. You can get this book at Desert Book or Amazon. It's mostly, as you know, stories of LGBTQ people. So the content is not me. It's all these stories of parents and LGBT people. Back to Brene Brown, People Are Hard to Hate, close up. And then the podcast. But there's been a real cost to this, Tate, I'll be honest.
Tell me about the cost.
And one of my mentors, Pastor Stan Mitchell, is in another faith and a really terrific ally. He said, if you don't feel the stones as an ally, you're not close enough. So I've always felt that any pain I feel as an ally in this space just helps me to know how a queer person feels just a little bit. So our joint friend, Matt Easton, who's just a terrific human being, as we both know, and gave that beautiful speech at BYU that was so courageous. And then the complications that came and the open condemnation for what he did, even though he had approval, just breaks my heart. So any pain he feels so much more pain than I felt. So the pain I feel as an ally is just, I think it's God's way of helping me understand the pain other people feel. But the cost has been loss of friends, criticism in my home ward about supporting queer people. They don't, and probably loss of the hope I had of what my church work would be. I've always felt there's callings that are on LDS tools, and then there's the calling you're doing right now with your efforts. And what I'm doing and other allies are doing that'll never show up on an LDS tools calling. My therapist calls it the shadow service. I kind of like that term.
I like that.
She has LGBTQ clients, so she understands, the need for this kind of work. And I feel seen and supported. But institutionally, I recognized a long time ago that the church would never, I've always felt the church, people ask me, Brother Ostler, has the church leadership reached out to you and said, we're glad what you're doing, or don't do this, or what can we learn from you? And I've come to the conclusion that no one's reached out to me. And that I wish they'd reach out to queer people and say, what can we learn from you? How can we improve the experience? Or me as an ally, what have you learned over 1,000 interviews? So that's painful, not for me, but the learning that I wish I could share, just non-doctrinal things we could do in our church to improve the experience for queer people. There's lots of things non-doctrinally that would help. But there's just pain in that space. So the church has never reached out to me to do this or not do this. And I think that's the best it's going to be. 20 years ago, they probably would have reached out to me and excommunicated me because we were in a different place than we were 20 years ago. So there's been a cost to that. And some of the dreams and the ways I thought I would serve in the church have certainly changed. So that's the biggest reason I go to a therapist is manage. And I'm being open and vulnerable here because I'm trying to role model that. Just dreams I once had for how I'd serve in the church and the standing I'd have in my faith community. So each year there's a round of mission presidents called, and every year there's a bunch of peers that I know, close friends, and I'm glad for them and the experience. But it's painful for me to know that won't ever happen for me. But at some point, back to God, I feel this is where God wants me to be. And I feel very at peace with my relationship with God and the work I'm doing here, and honored to do it. My therapist asked me, would you go back and not do this? Would you not, And I said, no, I wouldn't change a thing, because this is where I'm supposed to be and the work I'm supposed to be doing. And I'm honored to be here, but I don't ever want to make it about me, even though I'm being vulnerable here. Yeah. The focus, my privilege is hopefully to bring spotlight onto other people that have less, that we know less about, so we can better love.
It's a wonderful message.
And that's why I'm so supportive of what you're doing. And
thank you.
The fact you stepped forward in a really serious way. This isn't, a fly-by-the-night operation you're running here, Tate. When I saw your first, episode and commented, I was just thrilled you were doing this. And I thought, this is a bright, thoughtful guy who's a bridge builder, is a great intellectual and theology and pastoral skills to do this. And I knew you're taking it seriously. It's an honor to be on your platform, and you give me hope because of the work you're doing. And I hope it scales and more people connected with you. And I'm honored to have you on our platform at some point so we can get more people connected to you.
I appreciate it. And, you're talking about the cost, what you go through. Thank you so much for being brave. Because sometimes I think, a couple thoughts I have about it. First is, you've had such a big impact on me personally and in my own family, navigating relationships with queer family members and people in faith, people not in faith. So the impact that you've had is huge. And I've learned as I've started doing this podcasting stuff, that you kind of put words out there and you don't always know where the words go to, right? It's not like you get all the feedback from all the people who hear what you're saying. Sometimes you do, but thank you for doing it. And I really respect how you had this calling and you moved into it with purpose and empathy and grace, because sometimes people will hear the call to do something. And when it's a true call, like, you talk about people getting called as mission presidents and all that. I think that's a calling as well. But God calls people to do certain things even outside of typical religious organizations. And when you really hear a true call like that, it's kind of scary, But you embraced it fully, and it's made a big impact on people. So this very, very last question. What advice do you have to people who also feel a call to some kind of work? What advice would you give them?
Well, that's a great question. Some people think I want to be an ally, so I've got to start a podcast or I've got to write a book. My feeling is the principle is do what you can do in your circle of influence and be at peace, and don't compare you with others. So yeah, I've got a platform and a book, but don't just do what you can do in your circle of influence. And for most of us, that's going to be our family and our faith community. And be at peace. You don't need to change the world. You don't need to change the church. You don't need to change your school district, because just focus on what you can control and be at peace that that's all you need to do. And that's all God wants us to do. And everybody's circle of influence will look differently, and don't get comparative about that. And also give yourself grace if you can't do anything right now and you're in the middle of just surviving financially or with the complexities of your life or what's going on. Just put this as something in your brain you like to do at some point in the future. You have times in your life where you just have to take care of yourself. And some would call that selfish. I call it it's just the reality of mortality. You may be in school, you may have 3 jobs, you may be in an emotional situation where you can't get out of bed till noon. Just don't let the burden of wanting to be a better ally bring you down, and just do what you can in your circle of influence and time related when you can.
Great. Yeah, great. Not everyone has the same opportunities at the same time. I love that. And one thing that you touched on is an idea. I had to raise my microphone again. That I was reading about, which is your purpose or your calling. The size doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's a big thing or a small thing that you do. It's more of a qualitative thing, right? And you can do it with your heart, or you can do it not with your heart. And that's really what you're judged on, right? It's the broken heart, it's the contrite spirit, not that you have to go have 1 million followers or something like that. And I really appreciate your words. And then it will often grow into something bigger than you can expect. So 800, almost 900 episodes later.
True.
Been a ride, I'm sure. Thank you for doing it. And it means a lot.
Thank you.
So thank you, Pop Ostler.
Thank you, Tate Arnold.
All right.